G'day and welcome back to the Talking Leadership TV podcast series. My guest today is Mann, who is the founder of Future Horizon. You can find out more about what Neil is doing at www.futurehorizon.digital. Neil is a seasoned digital innovation leader with more than 2 decades of transformation experience. Neil has been based in Singapore since 2011 and has held global senior positions with leading international companies including Gartner, Kearney, Rio Tinto, UBS and Marina Bay Sands. My discussion with Neil today focuses on the intersection of leadership and innovation. I hope you enjoy the podcast today, and I'll hand over to Neil. Neil, thanks for your time, mate. Look, I really want to get stuck into a discussion, if we can, around leadership, innovation and tech. And I think for first principles sake and from a macro perspective, give us your definition of innovation from that technology space, mate.
Sure. And look, so I think first and foremost, it's about using technology to make things happen. So it's doing something different, and it's really about the value that that technology brings. So yes, there are technology innovations. So a new processor, for example, that's interesting, but what can we do with it? So it's answering that sort of so what question. So for me, the innovation is about what do we do today and how can we make that better? Or something that we can't do today, and then how do we use technology and digital innovation to actually make that happen? So it's very much about an enabler.
Excellent. And so in the industries that you touch on and the leaders that you speak to, is there still a bit of a grey cloud around what innovation actually is as a concept, and then what does it mean to operationalize what innovation looks like? Is there a bit of a miscommunication or mismatch with people thinking around that?
I think there is. That's definitely fair. Everybody that you speak to will recognize that innovation is a good thing, right? So, we want to innovate. We want to be like these disruptive new companies that are smaller and more nimble, because if we don't, then they're going to come along and eat our lunch. So every senior exec that you speak to will nod and say, yes, 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 innovation good, more of that and quicker, please, which is great. That gives us something to build upon. But then we need to turn that into something practical, right? So actually transmitting that into something in actuality is not necessarily straightforward, because often people in business will then look at it and say, well, the actual mechanics of that, oh, that's the technology question. And so the bit that's missing in the middle is, you've got the view from orbit, which is innovation good, and then right at the very sort of in the trenches, if you like, is the software and the hardware and everything to actually make that happen. But in between, there's obviously quite a lot of air. And so it's really a case of, okay, but what do you want to do? And so typically I will go in and speak to people and say, all right, so from a strategic point of view, you want to be more innovative. And so what that actually means is that you need to have cultural change, right? And change is about people. So when we're speaking about technology and digital and innovation, we're not actually speaking about the technologies in and of themselves. It's about what can they do, and then how do we actually do that. So actually making that happen in practice can be challenging, and often it goes wrong. But I think there is always appetite for that, and we need to get better at actually making things happen, because it's the large scale stuff that people are saying this is where we're going, but sometimes it just takes too long, and therefore you lose momentum, you lose credibility, and it costs time and money, and then sort of apathy, unfortunately, can sometimes kick in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in fact, you're going to need leaders that can engage with what innovation means from an industry perspective, of what does it mean in their own businesses. And I've often wondered with innovation, is that the playground? This is just me talking out loud. So if I'm talking crap, just please correct me as we go along here. I have a view that I think the innovation hubs are around those with an entrepreneurial bent that aren't necessarily in formal leadership roles, versus organizations that have your classic leadership structures, and there isn't that entrepreneurial bent in the business. And I'm not saying our businesses don't have this, but I get that the sneaking suspicion that I've got is that that innovation is being fostered out of the entrepreneurial types. Is that fair comment, or am I overreaching there?
No, I think it is fair comment. Obviously, these things are generalizations, but there's definitely something to be said for that. And I think, as I sort of touched upon before, to be innovative is you really need to change culture, right? Because you need to change process, you need to change thinking more than anything else. Because if you change somebody's thinking, you can change their actions. And so, in large scale organizations, it doesn't matter what vertical we're speaking about, whether it's financial services, natural resources, logistics, whatever, these companies work in a certain way, right? So they have processes and they have systems and they have norms, and that's what people are used to. And when you come in and you do something that is innovative, you are shaking the tree. You are asking them to do something different. And we all naturally, as humans, fear change. And so one of the things that I always try and do is say, look, yes, you need to provide that sort of macro map and strategy in terms of this is where we're going, this is why we're going there. And people can nod at it and say, okay, yeah, that sounds good. I get it. What does it mean for this person? What does it mean for me and my day to day and everything else? The other sort of dichotomy that large scale organizations have is that they, as you say, they want to be innovative. So that means having that sort of entrepreneurial mindset. But that's very, very different from how people in normal organizations think, and so how they do things as well. So that often sort of rubs against one another, right? So let's say from a procurement perspective, in a sort of standards IT department or something like that, you want to go out and get a vendor in, right? So you have to do this, and then you have to get this sign off, and then it has to go to market. That there's a process. For somebody in an entrepreneurial or entrepreneurial type of role within an organization to be innovative, they don't want to do that, right? They want to move quickly, and so those two things sometimes there's a bit of friction.
Yeah, it sounds to me like if your business had the capacity, and I think this does happen in large techs, you create a spin-off business where you put your entrepreneurial minded individuals, entrepreneurs, I think is the
Yeah,
term.
exactly. So it's somebody within a large scale enterprise. You're an entrepreneur because you're doing it within the organization to try and make the change happen internally, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. How common is that, or is that a fad that's sort of been and gone? Is that still something that big techs do?
They do, yes. I think it's one of those terms that if you're familiar with it, people say, I know what you mean. But not everybody is familiar with it. I don't think it is a fad because I think it is a good mechanism for actually making change and making innovation happen. But it's not easy to do, right? You can't just sort of create a department or create a team and say, you're the innovation department, you are now all entrepreneurs, because you need to enable them, right? Again, you need to sort of make sure that they have the capacity and the capabilities to do things differently. You can't just say, here's a room, here's a whiteboard, here's some Apple Macs, and suddenly you're entrepreneurs in the sort of the standard environment. It doesn't work like that. That's often what people do. We'll get you a room, we'll get you some bean bags, and suddenly we're going to turn ourselves into Google. Unfortunately, that doesn't work.
No, and I'll have to apologize for those that are watching the podcast or listening to the audio. I didn't mean to be flippant by using the word fat. I just couldn't find the right word. Look, I don't have your level of grey matter there, Neil. So you'll have to excuse me for a couple of stuff ups along the way. No, I just want to go back a little bit if we can. I think that friction within traditionally structured organizations and having that entrepreneurial element in the business, yeah, can potentially cause some friction. I guess it's for businesses moving on post COVID, and what we've learned as leaders from that process is that maybe we do need to foster more environments where people can make mistakes and challenge themselves. Because one thing that I've found
Absolutely.
from talking to many of those with an entrepreneurial bent, or those that are at their core entrepreneurs and there won't be anything else, is mistake making and stuffing things up is a critical part of the process while you're trying to get it right. Creating those and I hate using the word, but that safe space to be able to play and use your get the creative juices going is something you'd want to see happen. But I think I understand why it would grate with some organizations, because if it's not part of the cultural norm in the business, I think it would be hard to get that to inculcate across different levels. And it speaks to what kind of leadership do businesses have? Do they want to foster innovation at all levels in the business? Is it just for the senior executives to be the innovators? And I would suggest to you as well, this is a no-brainer. If you've got 30, 40, 50, 100 people in the business, that's 100 sets of brains that could help tackle a difficult problem. But now, whether or not we maximize the grey matter that we've got in our businesses is a whole nother podcast, and I think it's potentially underdone. What would your view on that be, Neil?
Yeah, look, I love what you said in terms of the risk thing. I think that's incredibly important when you come to innovation, because you're trying something new, right? You're trying something different, and even if you're taking something which has been proven in a different area of the world or a different industry, or even actually part of your business which is elsewhere, and you're trying it in yours, it doesn't mean it's going to work, right? So obviously, there's, like anything, there's a spectrum with innovation, right? You might be doing something which is like way, way, way out there, or you might actually be doing something which is for you quite innovative, right? And so therefore there's risk involved, but I think that safe space is really important. But why most people don't like risk is because, failure is a bad thing. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say failure is great, and I definitely don't subscribe to the of the sort of Silicon Valley, let's move fast and break things. But the only way to learn is to try. And so to try new things, you typically are going to make mistakes along the way, or certainly it's not going to be absolutely bang on the first time that you try it. But the reason why a lot of people don't like sort of taking those risks is because of the way that they're measured and the way that they're managed. Right. So things like service level agreements or sales targets or things like that, how we actually manage our people. Again, it's a cultural thing that we're speaking about in terms of innovation and transformation. Right. So if you say to somebody at the end of the week or the month of the year, this is what I expect you to do, that will drive the behaviors of those people. And then if you suddenly ask them to do something different, then that sometimes is a little bit challenging, especially if you only ask one small team or one small department to be innovative. But again, those other supporting departments, such as procurement, if they're not set up to be able to drive all that, then what you actually end up with is what I call innovation theater, which is where basically, you'll start up a little area of the business where you'll say, we're doing innovation, and, they're going to sit over here. And like I say, they've got Macs and they've got bean bags, and it's like brilliant. And you've got some smart people, and you bring them in, and then they find they can't get anything done. So there's a little bit of sort of razzmatazz and jazz hands initially, and then the momentum gets lost because they can't get anything done. And then, as I say, the apathy sets in, right? So it's not just about, you need to do it completely soup to nuts. And again, it's a cultural shift. You don't just install innovation, I'm afraid.
So you threw the grenade, and I'm going to ask you about this around Silicon Valley. Now, I watch too much TV. I listen to too much. I get on YouTube way too much, and I do try to follow what Silicon Valley is about, and that why is it so different in the US? And one thing, and this is good because this is all around leadership and understanding of culture. I think culture plays out at the business level, at the national level, and then at that transnational level. And I would ask you, maybe I'm being biased here, or definitely showing my lack of knowledge around this, but is the following statement some degree of true? The innovation culture and the people that drive it in Australia are qualitatively different to the Americans for a couple of different reasons. And you pointed out one about the rush to innovate in the US. Is it because in the US, and I'm not putting a value judgment on this, I'm just trying to create categories because that's how my mind works on something like this. I'm trying to understand it. is the entrepreneurial culture valued in a different way in the US context than it is in Australia or potentially Europe, South America, Africa? Is there a difference, and what do you think that looks like? Well, why is there a difference? I think I'm trying to ask.
I think that there absolutely is a difference, and that's what we're speaking about here is something that's far more macro. So I think there's, if without sort of getting it's too sort of widespread on it. If you think the whole American dream thing in terms of you can take a risk, you can have your future in your own hands, you can build something yourself. And so, obviously we're always speaking in generalizations here, right? One of the things about Australians is that, nobody likes somebody that's kind of peacocking around and sort of saying how brilliant you are. And so from an innovation perspective, that comes into it. Where I live in Asia, often people don't say anything, right? So you can have like a daily stand up or something like that, in an innovation type setting, and you can say to people, what went well yesterday? Okay, here's some good things. All right, what can we do differently? How can we get better? Silence, right? Or the boss speaks and so nobody else speaks. So there are, and obviously again, all those three things are generalizations, but there's definitely something in it in terms of how people are wired and what they are comfortable with, and I think that does sort of trickle down into terms of how people operate and then what the end results of that actually are.
Yeah, it seems intuitively that would be the case, but I think from the Australian context, the word entrepreneur has some baggage attached, and,
Mm-hmm.
and and I'm showing my age here, but going back to Christopher Skase and a few entrepreneurs that were really beefed up by the media, and then when things went to poo and they ran away from the country to non-extradition countries, that we realize that maybe there's a downside to entrepreneurialism, and I think maybe that blurred the lines between, is innovation solely the playground of the entrepreneurs? And I don't think it is. I think there's many shades
No.
of where it can come from, but this is just a perception thing. But I think we're in furious agreement that it's important to be fostering innovation, but from that leadership context, it's definitely in how your business is structured. If you've got a silo being innovative and pushing innovation, and that's not progressed through the structures of the business, you're going to have some real difficulties in getting anything done. And it stands to reason then, and if you get bored or frustrated key people, they're going to walk to somewhere where this is going to be the norm. And in the current employment environment, particularly in Australia, we don't want to be losing good people to other businesses because the cost of replacing them is just becoming nightmarishly difficult. And I think it just creates more work for recruitment agencies who know that this is going to be happening more and more if businesses don't get their proverbial shit together. So no, yeah, mate, we could go down the rabbit hole of the entrepreneurs and culture, but I think the points that you made are very well made. Let me ask you something, Neil. From the perspective of, just bring you back to leadership specifically and innovation, are leaders the source of innovation? Are they enablers of innovation, or some combination of the two? Or have I got it bloody wrong completely?
No, I think you're bang on, and I think the answer is yes. I think it needs to be both. So I think to display leadership, you need to say, like, come with me, follow me. This is where we're going to go, and then you also need to be able to have the plums to make that happen. So to your earlier point, the leaders can say, we're going to be more innovative, we're going to disrupt, we're going to change, we're going to morph. And again, the people that are several rungs down in that business, and it doesn't matter whether you have 100 people or whether you've got 100,000 people. It's about, well, okay, well, what does that mean in actuality? What are the mechanics of that? And so you as a leader need to be able to say, right, so again, we've got the vision, we've got the strategy, we've got the target, but what actually therefore needs to change, right? And so you need to be able to say, that this is what I want to do. And typically It's about what do I want to stop doing, what's painful or what's inefficient, or what do I actually want to do in terms of an aspiration. And I think you need to be clear from a business standpoint, what are those things? And then you sort of apply a digital and technology lens on top of that with innovation to say, okay, how might we actually get there? What are the options? And then just you need to start. You need to start small. We try stuff that didn't work. We course correct, right? We pivot. We try something else. Don't hold on to a problem because you spent a long time making it. It's one of the pieces of advice I always say, right? You need to be able to say, scrub it, quit it. That one didn't work. What do we learn from it? How do we make a better, more informed decision? The next time around.
Yeah, that's good advice for anyone listening that's trying to grapple with this. And I think the innovation issue is not owned by any one industry. And I think government as well. I mean, as much as government is assumed to be not a place for innovation, it's definitely an enabler of innovation if it gets its proverbial stuff together and is prepared to engage on what do you need? What does the infrastructure of innovation look like? And that, again, is a whole nother discussion we can have. And we will come back to a lot of these because we're only touching this at that macro level. So there's a lot more to talk about, Neil. But let me bring you back to the innovation paradox and the role of leadership now as a way to orient those that are watching the video or listening to the podcast. Just a bit of a definition around this, and I'll unpack this a bit and see what you think. The notion of innovation productivity paradox refers to a coexistence of existing new tech innovations, and the example are AI, digitization, machine learning, robotics as examples, and declining productivity rates in 21st century OECD economies. Let's unpack that a bit. So is the paradox a real thing from your experience, and how are businesses engaging with it, or are we not engaging with it and hope that it's not going to be an issue for us?
I think the answer is it depends. The paradox definitely is a thing for sure. And again, you speak to sort of senior business leaders, and everybody sort of recognizes we need to be at least looking at these things, right? So we want to do things with AI because it's the power and the value that will unlock, and it will make our people more efficient, and we want to move them up the value chain and all these types of things. It all sounds great, right? The sales pitch is very, very compelling, but actually doing that in actuality can be quite challenging. And I think I certainly have regular conversations where people are saying, we want to do something innovative, we want to do something different. Okay, that's great. So we sort of, we kick it around, we come up with some ideas, and quite often people look at it and go, well, that sounds great. Could be risky. Oh, it could be expensive. Can you tell me who else has done this? So that is very much a paradox, right? So it's a case of, we want to be bleeding edge. We want to get that competitive advantage. But, people are sometimes then, when you begin to talk about this is what it's going to take in terms of your people and time and cost and risk, then, a little bit of movement in the chair where people are less comfortable with that. And look, you don't always have to be first mover advantage, right? So, somebody like Apple, which everybody always goes, oh, we want to be like Apple, we want to be innovative. The iPhone wasn't the first touchscreen mobile phone, right? So these types of things, you don't always have to be first, but it needs to come back to first principles from a business standpoint in terms of what are you trying to do. And I use a question I use it all the time, and I say to people, what does good look like? And you need to be able to answer that in simple terms, in business terms. You go, right, and then you can write that down and like stick it on the wall and say that's what we're trying to get to. And then let's actually unpack that. Let's break that down and look at what some of the options are to actually maybe get us there. And look, sometimes it's not about just doing the technology for the sake of it. Other conversations I have is that people come along and say, oh, we want to do something with this particular technology, and I'll say, well, that's very exciting. What do you want to do? and then there's a bit of an awkward pause, and then they sort of blink a few times and they say, well, we were hoping that you could tell us that. And then it's a hammer looking for a nail, right? You don't, unfortunately, again, you don't install innovation. And people such as myself, we don't, I often say that digital and innovation it's not an ingredient, right? It's not MSG, and I don't carry it around with me in a trailer that I can come along and say, yes, certainly you'd like some digital innovation. Certainly, madam. Would you like a teaspoon or would you like a tablespoon? You don't just sort of add it to things. It's not an additive, because again, it's about culture, it's about people. The actual tech in and of itself is just a mechanism to make it happen.
Yeah, I was. Wow, I've got a million questions running around in my head, but one that sticks out here is, and one that I've seen happen before, and then you brought it up here, and I thought I might unpack it a little bit if we can, is that companies, bigger businesses, I would say, and governments often look for someone to give them the silver bullet, or at least give them the formula to find that silver bullet to fix some wicked problems we've got. And I think at times they miss the point that if you know what your endpoint is, what your goal is, your why, whether that's in business or in government, then you work back from that and you see what are the resources needed to move ahead. And it for me, it brings up this connection with, and I don't think I'm drawing too long a bow here, with some leadership capabilities around foresight and strategic thinking, like be able to get a pathway to your goal, understand what the good and the bad, the ugly of that journey is going to look like, and then looking at potential possible futures and thinking, well, we can come up with a million possible futures, but which are the ones that are realizable and which are the ones that are higher risk? And typically it's those higher risk ones that you want to play with if you can, if you're trying to look for innovation. Whereas what I don't hear in the discussion from the leaders that I've spoken to, and maybe it's because you're not consciously thinking about this, is, are you truly playing in the innovation space, or are you trying to be innovative with processes and products or services that already exist? Are you adding to what's there, which I believe is that's the thinner end of the wedge if you're talking about something new or fixing a gap in a problem or fixing that problem, versus coming in with a solution that no one else has come up with. Does that ring true for you, Neil?
It does, yes. It very much resonates. And look, I think incremental innovation is perfectly acceptable, right? It's lower risk, and actually, as long as you or your customers or your stakeholders are deriving value from that, then that's okay. Good on you, and at least gives you something to build from. And look, even when I have conversations with people and they say, look, we want to do something in this, frankly, just to have a bit of good PR. It's a little bit of jazz hands, and we want to kind of do something, but we're not actually going to use it afterwards, probably, and we're going to bin it. I actually don't mind that, as long as people are upfront about it. I think it's when they try and say, we want to do something that's just going to be seismic. We're going to move the tectonic plates of the business. They're not actually, because you can just tell that they're not in it for the long haul. And I think you're right that a lot of the time, people just want to do something. They want something sort of snazzy and whizzy because they've read something in Fortune or Forbes or Harvard Business Review or The Economist, and they're like, I want one of those. It's a shiny, sexy trinket. Give me some of that action. And look, again, I think that's okay, but let's just have an adult conversation about what that actually means. What are we investing in? What are we trying to do? Again, what does good look like? And to do real change, to do real innovation, it's a little bit like climbing a cliff, right? It takes skill, it's hard, it's risky. Any fool can jump off a cliff, but climbing one is a different paradigm.
Yeah, 100% agree. Look, Neil, before we go, and just a final thought from you, if I can push the friendship a little, is in terms of what leaders need in their toolkit to be more effective around innovation, what would you suggest to emerging, existing, and would-be leaders of the future, I guess? What do they need in that toolkit to really engage with innovation from your perspective, mate?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you touched upon it a little bit earlier. Is that looking forward and looking at what the future might look at, and looking at these options? There's no risk in that. There's no risk in that at all. And look, do nothing is always an option. But I think looking outside, looking further down the track, I'd encourage any leader to do that, right? You really do. And also don't just think about your own domain, and whether that's your geographic domain or your industry or something like that. There's certain industries I work with that are just very, very navel glazing, right? They're very inward looking, and we're special, and I'm not saying, for example, that something from aerospace is going to work in insurance, but you can at least look at that and just say, well, look, that's interesting. What can we learn from that? And the middle part of the Venn might be very thin, but I think it's interesting. And get an external pair of eyes, get somebody to sort of to come in and help you look at things, because they will see things that you won't, especially if you've been in the business for quite some time. The people just come in and gently, at least initially, sort of poke some holes, right? Why do you do things like that? And when you get the answer of, oh, we couldn't possibly do that, or that can't be changed. Well, why not? Or let's just assume that if it could be changed, what would that mean? What would that look like? Get somebody to kind of come in and really challenge your thinking. I think is something that you always want to have. I think that's valuable.
Yeah, could not agree more. I guess what you're alluding to, and something that I keep coming back to in the conversations I'm having, Neil, is you really do need introspective, reflective leader to be thinking about what innovation means. You need a bit of breathing space to think on all of those things that you mentioned. The goal is important, but I think the journey to get to the goal is probably more critical, because there's more things that could go wrong. Like, the end point is great, but it's in that journey that we need to be thinking a lot more. And look, Neil, I appreciate this initial discussion. I think, if with your permission, I'll reach out again, and maybe we get into the weeds a little bit more with some of the topics that we've brought up today, if you're up for the discussion, mate.
Certainly, yeah. Look, thank you for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure, and I'd love to have another discussion about some of these very interesting topics.
No worries, Neil. So if people want to get in touch with you to talk tech innovation, how can they best get in touch with you, mate?
Yeah, thank you. So my company is called Future Horizon. You can go to Future Horizon, all one word, .digital, and you can connect with me there. Also on LinkedIn and the usual sort of channels.
I've been speaking with Neil Mann. Thanks again to Neil for sharing his views on leadership and innovation. As always, thank you for following the podcast. Please drop a like if you enjoyed the content, or if you can, please subscribe to help me grow the channel. Have a great week, look after yourselves, and we'll catch everyone on the next episode of Talking Leadership TV.